Before we begin this episode, I want to set a framework for this conversation. Today, we are talking about probably one of the most difficult conversations to have in the world of politics about Gaza, the recognition of Palestine, and the moral questions that the world faces at this moment. This is not an easy subject. It involves grief, politics, faith, justice, a set of very complicated issues, but then the lives of ordinary people are caught in it in very extraordinary, violent ways. Our goal in this episode is not to fuel division, it's not to dehumanize any community. It's to ask, how do we respond with truth, compassion, and courage when faced with mass suffering of this scale? What has happened in the past, and how are we expected to adjust to such situations when they are occurring in our current systems? As you listen, I invite you to hold three commitments to yourself. First, I want you to condemn mass killings of all forms. It's something that we all must do. A world that ignores or justifies mass killing is a world that is failing. Second, violence is never justified, no matter the reason, no matter the trigger, no matter the rhetoric. Hatred only prolongs the cycle, and there's so much evidence to support that. But finally, reliable facts and moral courage are essential if we want to move towards peace and stability. Keeping these in mind, we can now begin. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas carried out an attack in Israel that killed about 1,200 people and took more than 250 hostages. The response from Israel has devastated Gaza. By mid 2025, local health authorities estimate over 60,000 Palestinians killed and nearly 146,000 injured, most of them civilians. UN experts have described the situation as an unfolding genocide. The International Association of Genocide Scholars has voted overwhelmingly that Israel's actions meet the legal definition of a genocide. At the same time, momentum has grown for recognition of Palestine as a state. On September 21st, 2025, the UK, Canada, Australia, Portugal joined more than 150 countries in formally recognizing Palestine. Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, said this was about keeping alive the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. At the UN's two-state conference that week, even more countries joined. By now, 157 UN member states recognize Palestine. Israel has condemned these moves, threatening annexations in the West Bank. Meanwhile, the US has vetoed 6 UN Security Council resolutions calling for a ceasefire and unimpeded aid, blocking international action. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has called this hypocrisy, pointing to Europe's strong response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine while failing to act decisively in Gaza. This is the backdrop to our conversation today. Mass suffering, global inaction, but also a wave of recognition that suggests the world might be shifting. I'm joined by Faithfulness Okom to help us navigate the moral, legal, and faith dimensions of this crisis. And as difficult as it might get, Faithfulness, I've dragged you into this one. So, um, any initial thoughts before we begin? What are your expectations of this conversation?
I mean, I'm always happy to come on here to discuss with you or Erasmus. I'm a friend of the podcast, but this particular conversation I think is very delicate, and there are obvious consequences. You know, when you speak about the issue, I think that the powers that be have taken it upon themselves to, as much as possible, silence voices and and restrain, people from speaking from their hearts and you know speaking from their conscience about this issue. So when you reached out to me to discuss on this topic, of course, my intuition was this is very sensitive. You could be quoted, and there could be consequences for you. But again, I feel that strong obligation to lend my voice to this topic, and I also feel that strong impulse to be on record,
Yeah.
because this is certainly something that I think is really horrific. However you want to look at what has happened in Gaza and in Palestine. And I think that this is the defining moment of our generation, of this era in human
Yeah.
history. And I am also strengthened by the fact that I am certain that in the nearest future, everybody is going to act like they always opposed this genocide.
Yeah.
It has happened several times in history where during that period, everyone denies what is going on, denies the extent of devastation, denies the immorality
Yeah.
um, of the actions that have been carried out. But after 50 years, there is a reluctant apology, there is a
Yeah.
re-evaluation of things. So I am sure that whatever I say here will be on the right side of history. I have searched myself. I have done my research over 2 years. I wasn't always very informed about this
Yeah.
topic, this conversation. I was also ignorant to a great extent. But you know, um, 2 years ago, yeah, I really started to look into the facts, the history. Everyone always said it was complicated, and
Yeah.
but yeah, but yeah, it's complex. But I think at the end
Yeah.
of the day, there are certain moral minimums, and I believe
Yeah.
strongly in moral minimums. And one strong moral minimum is that human lives, men, children, women, you know, must be valued absolutely, and that it is on that premise that I stand. And yeah, I hope we have a very enlightening conversation. I will try not to get carried away with my emotions, and
Yeah.
just try to be as direct as possible.
Yeah. Just before we go into the planned questions, you use the word moral minimum, the words moral minimum, just to help whoever is listening understand your perspectives from that point. Could you briefly explain what moral minimums are? Why should anyone care about anything of that nature?
Yeah, I think moral minimums are the non-negotiables, and I think the way humanity has evolved, we have been able to agree on certain moral minimums. And that is the entire premise of international humanitarian law and international law.
Yeah.
That parties will war, I mean, it's been long, it's been a long time I took legal courses on international law in university, but I remember like very well that I wrote my long essay on the jus in bello of a just war. So jus in bello, and there's jus in bello, and there's jus ad bellum. And a jus in bello is basically the laws that govern conflict, and those laws I have found are moral minimums,
Yeah.
because even if it essentially says, even though war is happening, there are certain standards, that should be kept. There
Yeah.
are certain things that shouldn't happen. You should not. There are certain military objectives that you can target, and there are certain civilian places that should be protected. Religious sites, shouldn't be touched. Women and children should be protected. I think those are basic moral minimums. And
Yeah.
so, even though wars are ugly, wars are devastating, civilization, the evolution of mankind, the evolution of war means that, we should be able to fight in ways that do not, erode the entire values that we have built over time. And I think
Yeah.
that that is what moral minimums should be. So even though you want to say a war is happening, there should be moral minimums.
Yeah.
Children should be a no-go area,
Yeah.
and you should not even be able to use the argument of human shield. If you're fighting any group of people and they put around 100 children to shield themselves, I'm of the opinion that that is valid. You have to find a way to go around the children. You shouldn't bomb all the children because say yeah, you use human shields. So that's what I mean by moral minimums.
Yeah. Interesting. So let's now go into it. How did we get here? Because before October 7th, there's a sort of history behind the relationship between Israel and Palestine. And what made October 7th, what history is that made the happenings on October 7th, Hamas going into Israel and killing people, trigger that amount of backlash and heavy rain down to the point of an international, what do you call it, genocide that's basically have been occurring for almost a year now. And and you look at it and you're wondering, why was October 7th that big of a trigger? Is there a history to it? And how does that history play into what we are seeing now?
Okay, so I think to understand how we got here, you have to go back over a century.
Yeah,
Um, Modern Zionism began with a guy called Theodor Herzl, and interestingly, Theodor Herzl was not religious. He was an atheist, and I think that that's a very important point to share because many people assume that Zionism was always a religious project, but it wasn't. Zionism grew out of the need to protect Jewish people.
yeah,
It grew out of centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe,
yeah,
and anti-Semitism in Europe became a very devastating problem because you had forced ghetto confinements. You had
yeah,
Jews being restricted from um, owning owning land, being excluded from many professions.
yeah,
And, the church in many European countries even banned Jews from getting involved in most trades.
yeah,
That was one of the reasons why the only option that Jewish people had in many communities was money lending. And I think that became like the building block for Jewish dominance in the financial ecosphere. And so Herzl and the early Zionists also, interestingly, considered Uganda as a potential homeland before
yeah,
settling on Palestine. Like it was a very interesting conversation because there were many suggestions. I think that at some point they even considered Argentina to be the homeland for Jews, and Uganda, I know for a fact, was strongly considered. So you can see that it wasn't really about religion. Uh, it was more pragmatic than it was religious. It was
yeah,
about finding a safe place, a safe haven for Jews who were fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe,
yeah,
and Palestine was um, actually chosen because of the historic and religious significance. I think it would be foolishness try to to deny like there is some religious significance there,
yeah,
uh, but I think the main points that should not be lost on the listener is that Zionism was always politically and strategically motivated.
yeah,
And then in 1917, you had the Balfour Declaration.
yeah,
And again, yeah, I think like the listener at this point can Google the Balfour Declaration and read it verbatim. But many people think that the Balfour Declaration was, and if you read the wording, it looks like a random act of benevolence. These nice guys are just giving you, are carving out a city or a city or land for you
yeah,
far away. It looks like a very benevolent gesture, but again, it wasn't just purely out of benevolence. It was out of political maneuvering. Um, Britain was in the middle of World War One. They wanted influence in the Middle East. They wanted to access oil routes and to secure favor with very powerful Jewish financiers like the Rothschild family.
yeah,
And that was why the Balfour Declaration came about. So it was also something that was very it was political maneuvering. That's the long and short. So in essence, Palestinians were not consulted. Um, their land, their future did not factor into consideration whatsoever. And of course, like that is always going to be a problem. So then
Yeah,
in 1948, you have the Nakba happening. And I encourage listeners to read about the Nakba because overnight, 750 Palestinians were expelled from their homes. They lost their properties, they lost their land, they lost their livelihoods. And Gaza became a concentrated area of the displacement. And over time, the restrictions only tightened. Right now, Israel controls the borders. Israel controls water, controls electricity, and even internet access in
yeah,
in Gaza. There is the no return policy, which has trapped generations. Many commentators refer to Gaza as an open air prison, and if you leave, there is a no return policy. You cannot come
yeah,
back. So many families, you can imagine, have been created. And I would say that Hamas emerged partly as a response to this oppression, and partly because um, Israel also deliberately sought to weaken the Palestinian liberation movement, which was the most legitimate political structure in Palestine at the time. So basically, Netanyahu has been on record admitting that he played a role in funding Hamas because he saw them as the more radical version, and he wanted to, divide and conquer. So Israel played a role in creating Hamas, which is something that is quite interesting when you hear how now Israelis try to demonize Hamas and make them look like the most deplorable kinds of terrorists. So of course, when you have that divide and conquer strategy, and peace talks over the decades have failed, and you know yeah, like I think these things always happen. But
yeah,
by October 7th, 2023, there had been decades of occupation, of blockades, and systemic inequality, and all of those had built up a pressure cooker of desperation and of resistance. So I think what we saw then was a very sad, outpouring or catharsis of all the years of very, very serious and built-in hatred, angst, frustration, and yeah, it was, I would say, sad. At the time, I didn't. By October 7th, 2023, I didn't really understand the conflict in great depth and great detail.
yeah,
So I struggled to grapple with how that kind of devastation could be because some people, almost justified it. And at the time, I didn't understand any context. So for me, it seemed outrageous,
yeah,
but eventually, when I read more into it, I could see how that is deplorable, but also how, like, that was a logical prediction. Like that was a logical anticipation. So yeah,
yeah.
I think that's basically how we got to this point.
To be very honest, the analogy you used to describe it probably makes it make a lot more sense in the reactionary context as to somebody receiving punches over and over and over again. At some point, you should expect that they would punch back, whether it is a measured punch, whether it is a punch out of survival, whether it is a punch, whatever they get their hands on, they will throw at you. And it's a natural reaction to the systemic oppression that has been going on. And I don't think I myself, because I started reading about Israel Palestine way back in 2018 when I was learning about it for debate purposes. And so I actually spent hours in my first year in uni watching a lot of documentaries on Israel Palestine conflict, like hours and hours, and taking notes on it for debate purposes. But I never understood it from that context as to the fact that it's bound to happen. Those kinds of reactions are bound to happen if you subject a group of people to perpetual exploitation, perpetual repression, perpetual suffering in the manner in which Palestinian people have endured. Um, Moving on to what we have today, most experts call it a genocide. There's some form of fraction of people who say this is not a genocide. Obviously, the for political interests, those who it favors would say it's a genocide, those who it doesn't would say it's not. And I think that has been a general problem we have um, every single time these international issues happen. Some sets of people, for their benefit, would say a group is not a terrorist organization. Another set of people, for the very fact that they see, would say this group is clearly a terrorist organization and we have to deal with it. What constitutes a genocide? Because the word genocide carries a lot of weight. And experts have been saying clearly what is happening in Gaza meets the definition of a genocide. Israel vehemently denies this. So, from your perspective, and obviously you have a legal background, what is the legal definition of a genocide, and why is what happening meeting that standard, or how is what happening meeting that standard? Because for me, for instance, I've not I understand what is happening. I understand that it is a genocide, but I've not had it explained to me from a legal point of view, and I've not bothered to really check what is the legalities. Is there some technical escape for anyone to be able to say this is not a genocide? Because it sounds like there is some complicated definition of a genocide, and maybe I don't know about it, and that's why people can get up and say, "No, what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide." Because if there is no complex definition to it, I think everybody should be able to see it for what it is. So the purpose of this question is mainly for education for people who have these dissenting views, but probably do not have a context to back it and are just holding on to the narratives around it.
So I want to start by, I mean, of course, saying upfront that I'm not an international law expert. That is
Yeah,
not my specialization or specialty, if you want. But of course, as you said, many reputable um, organizations have weighed in on the topic and have given their opinions. I'll just read the UN's definition of a genocide.
yeah,
So the UN defines a genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And that includes killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the group, preventing births, or forcibly transferring children. And I mean, nobody wants to be complicit in a genocide. I think Israel is desperate to frame this as a war because then if it's a war, you can just shrug all the commentary on or all the casualties as consequences of a war. You know, I've
yeah,
heard many Israeli government officials saying, "Yeah, war is brutal, war is horrendous. These things happen." But yeah, with genocide, there has to be intent, and I think also now you have the case being made against Israel at the International Criminal Court of Justice,
yeah,
and these are the issues that are being discussed. Is there intent? And I think with intent, you don't have to say. With intent, doesn't have to be verbalized. So, for example, if I want to shoot you, to prove criminal intent in murder, if, for example, I shoot somebody, I don't have to say, "Hey, Andrews, I am shooting you. Now you're going to die." Boom.
yeah,
For that to be intent. The mere act of pointing a gun at your face and shooting the middle of your head constitutes intent. So if
yeah,
I shoot you in the middle of your head and then I say, "Oh, I didn't intend to shoot." Okay. Like if you didn't intend to shoot, what did you expect the outcome to be when you
yeah,
pointed a gun in the middle of the head? So no matter how Israeli government officials or American politicians try to argue that um, there is no genocide because there is no intent, and the intent of the Israeli government is to eliminate Hamas. You know, no
yeah,
matter how you make the argument, if you bomb a place that is condensed with with the civilian population and you kill 70 Hamas fighters and you also kill 1,000 civilians, I think that it's fair to conclude that the intent is genocidal.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing and the interesting aspect of this conversation is that we have seen, and South Africa has made this case
Yeah.
at the International Court of Justice. South Africa has made this overwhelmingly clear. We have seen the rhetoric from members of the Knesset, and members of the Israeli government. We have seen
Yeah.
them express genocidal intent. Multiple members, the
Yeah.
Minister of Defense, even the President, have all said things that can be construed as genocidal intent. So I think that entire argument, it's really the entire argument that has come from the US is very questionable.
Yeah.
And I mean, you have organizations like the Human Rights Watch, you have Amnesty International, um,
Yeah.
joining voices with the United Nations Independent International Commission of Inquiry. On the occupied Palestinian territory. They have highlighted that there have been systematic and systemic practices in Gaza that fit many of the
Yeah.
criteria. There have been mass killings. There's been the targeting of civilians. There has been the deliberate destruction of homes and
Yeah.
infrastructure, and an extreme privation of water, food, of medical care, electricity, all of these targeted to make survival nearly impossible. And many of these things are very undeniable. So I think when you
Yeah.
put everything together, the blockade of aid coming in,
Yeah.
the repeated airstrikes, the targeting of essential civilian infrastructure, and the sheer scale of civilian casualties, like the scale of civilian casualties could not have been random or incidental. Like
Yeah.
there's been very credible reports that more than 600,000 people have been killed. That cannot be incidental. Like that
Yeah.
cannot be random.
Yeah.
That has to be systematic, and that has to be planned. And that's very systematic intent to destroy a part of a population is exactly and precisely what the law describes to be genocide. So again, I'm not a legal authority on this particular topic, but I think when multiple respected human rights organizations, I would add, that in the past, have been relied upon when the
Yeah.
narrative suited, Western countries. I think when these very respected human rights organizations point to these facts and say the threshold for genocide has been met, then I think that it's something that we all have to take seriously. I don't think it's hyperbole. I think it's a legal classification that is based on decades of
Yeah.
evidence and all international definitions.
Wow. There's a difficult question that pops up in my head as a follow up to this. And I've contemplated whether I should ask it, but it tends to be the response people give anytime you posit to them that what is happening is a genocide. The response is no, because it's self defense. No, because it is trying to root out Hamas. It's as if to say that once rooting out Hamas is on the table, it's impossible to commit a genocide. I don't know if it makes sense. It's as if to say once you are trying to kill Hamas people, then you can never commit a genocide. And I think is this to resolve the fact that no matter the auxiliary objectives you can put on the table, the actions clearly communicate genocide. Genocide thresholds have been met, they've been constantly evaluated, and they've been commented on severally. There are cases at the ICC that prove to that, which shows that it's no more rational to simply say, yeah, we are looking for Hamas, therefore it's not a genocide. It is, I think, what is concluding to is you can be looking for Hamas and still be committing a genocide, and you need to accept both. You don't get to use one as a defense for the other.
No, I'm absolutely. I think that makes a whole lot of sense. These are not mutually exclusive. The fact that you have the intent of looking out for, eliminating terrorists, as you call them, doesn't necessarily mean that you might not have a genocidal intent. And I think there are many, minor examples that can crystallize this. If
Yeah,
there is a building occupied by 50 families and let's say 200 people, and there are 10 terrorists in one of those buildings. Like, look, we have seen many movies, real life situations too, where
yeah,
a, a robber gets into a bank and holds everyone there hostage.
yeah,
I have never for one I've never for once seen the police come in and kill everybody because they intend to kill the robber who is there.
yeah,
Like it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't
yeah,
make any sense. And I think that these kinds of narratives um, only function very well when Palestinians are dehumanized,
yeah,
when they are vilified, when they are demonized. And I have seen those kinds of rhetoric you know, in Israeli media.
yeah,
I have seen that many Israelis see these people as demons, as the Amalekites who have to all be
yeah,
eradicated. And it is only when you see them as such that you would not have any problems. Because many Israelis have said, "Oh yeah, even the children have to be killed." Like these are, and anyone who has a problem with this, you can ask, and I will send you videos of Israelis who have said this, that yeah, there are no children in Palestine or in Gaza. They are all terrorists because one day they're going to grow up and they're going to kill us. Like that makes no sense. So I
yeah,
feel for you to I think Israelis have tried and also failed, I would say, to convince the entire world that Palestinians do not deserve any real
empathy.
human treatment. And
Yeah,
that's why you have all the the battle and the confrontation with the
yeah,
media, because the media is trying so hard to control the narratives. But people can see through the crap. People
yeah,
can see that these are human beings that deserve that. You like. I mean, first of all, I think we'll talk about Hamas
yeah,
a bit more. But assuming they are the worst kinds of criminals, I feel and I insist that if you have the legitimate target of eliminating them and they are making it difficult but for you by embedding themselves in civilian populations, do what you have to do. Negotiate with them. Like they have also aligned themselves with UN suggestions, with various UN consensus agreements towards the resolution of the conflict. So Hamas has not
yeah,
proven to be completely unreasonable. So I mean, many people internationally agree also that Benjamin Netanyahu is a terrorist, that he's a genocidal warmonger. Even within Israel, many people see him as being as not being that entirely reflective of all Israelis. So
yeah,
should we also eliminate him? And in eliminating him, should we destroy the entire civilian population of Israel? Like it makes no sense whatsoever. So
yeah,
I really don't buy that. I really don't buy that argument
yeah,
whatsoever.
yeah, definitely. And it's pointing to a fundamental flaw in the logic that there can never be multiple intentions on a specific journey. It's one intention and exclusively one. Therefore, if they prove that the intention is this, no other intention can be read, can be seen, can be observed, even if the facts tell us that those intentions are probably the most prominent and the most manifested in those actions. Right off the back of this conversation, which I think people who disagree with us will definitely feel that way, would probably be classified, or we might be classified as such, is that critics of Israel's war are often accused of anti Semitism, which is one of history's oldest and deadliest hatreds. Obviously, anti Semitism is bad. It's one that we shouldn't condone. Jewish people, as much as I hate what is happening, like you are saying, the response to this will not be let's go and then do unto them whatever they are doing unto Palestine, right? That's not the response. And that's not the kind of solution that you want. So how do we distinguish between anti-Semitism and legitimate criticism of Israel? And what do you think about how anti-Semitism as a term is being used um, currently? Is anti-Semitism being used the right way on critics of Israel, or is it being abused in terms of what it means and the people it's being labeled towards?
Um, yeah. So, I mean, I want to be as clear as possible.
Yeah,
Um, I think that anti-Semitism is one of the oldest and deadliest forms of hatred that the world has ever seen. Um, Learning about anti-Semitism really broke my heart
yeah,
because there were myths that existed that Jews killed the Messiah, and you then had centuries of exclusion of Jewish people. You
yeah,
had pogroms. You had, like I mentioned earlier, ghetto confinements, restrictions um, on land ownership, and laws that pushed Jewish people into money lending.
yeah,
And you know th- these all weren't just injustices. They were systematic attempts
yeah,
to dehumanize an entire people,
yeah,
and of course, everything culminated in the horrors of the Holocaust, which I
yeah,
think is one of the most devastating um, incidents of incidents rather of
yeah,
the of history in its entirety. So I think recognizing the history of anti-Semitism is critical
yeah,
in the conversation. And I think, however, that criticizing Israel's policies is not the same of is not the same as having hatred of Jewish people. And
yeah,
I think you should be able to criticize governments, policies, and their actions, and not have that construed as a criticism of an entire people or religion.
yeah,
How I mean, unfortunately, however, just like you have just like you insinuated, um, um, that label of anti-Semitism has been misused, has been abused to silence people who are pointing out the very gory and very horrendous human rights abuses that have been taking place in Gaza. So
yeah,
I think it's important to separate the two. I think that we have to fight anti-Semitism with everything that we've got.
yeah,
I believe very firmly that if I lived during the Second World War, that I would have been with the Jewish people.
yeah,
I the same moral compass that and moral calculus that has led me to supporting the Palestinians is the very same moral compass that would have made me to support Jewish people against the horrors of the Holocaust. And so I think we have to fight anti-Semitism
yeah,
with all that we've got. I think it's a moral imperative, but I think we also have an overwhelming moral imperative to fight for justice for the people of Palestine. I think that those are not contradictory. I think
yeah,
those are not mutually exclusive. You can care deeply about Jewish safety and history, while also, pointing out that the occupation of Palestinian land, the blockades, and the systemic oppression are wrong and morally
yeah,
reprehensible. I think that one of them never be used to justify ignoring the other. So for
Yeah.
me personally, learning about anti-Semitism's history um, deepened my empathy to the cause
Yeah.
of Jewish human rights, and
Yeah.
it also helped me understand why Jews have longed for a safe homeland. Um,
Yeah.
However, it at the same time made me very firm in my realization that the solution to the horrors of the past, the horrors that Jewish people have endured, cannot come at the expense of the human
Another group.
rights of another set of people.
Yeah.
Justice fundamentally must honor everyone's humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is quite interesting to me because I think recently, when the South African government started taking lands from white people, and then you had a whole political discussion around it to the degree where even Trump commented on it, and it was the tones around it was more like the South African government is being racist towards whites in South Africa and taking away their lands, and that's unfair and that's fundamentally unjust. And I'm drawing this analogy because a lot of the time, the logic between criticizing and being labeled as anti Semitic is usually to say that because of the horrors that Israel suffered during through anti Semitism, through the Holocaust, and all the horrific things that happened to them, that we all condemn, because of that, they literally do not have the capacity to impose those horrors on another group of people. And usually that's the foundational premise on which people argue from. And I point to this South African example because those sorts of undertones tend to vanish when it comes to South Africa. Because then everybody is bold enough to say a South African government that was built, or a South African national identity to its large extent, that was built on fighting systemic oppression and occupation and apartheid, is now turning around and being racist on white people. When it comes to South Africa, we don't say that a group of people who survived apartheid do not have the capacity to be racist. But then when it comes to Israel, those are usually the logics that are used to say that any critique of Israel is anti Semitic because they literally do not have the capacity to impose upon other people what they themselves experienced in their history. And I just wanted to point that out to just bear to mind a comparison to how we deal with these political issues. One might not be, like you said, at the exclusion of the other. And we can hold both things to be equally bad, equally dangerous. The world should fight both of them with everything that we've got to ensure that every single human being enjoys the moral minimums of the world, in which they are regarded as a moral agent, as a person who deserves decency and agency to the degree that would extend to every person that we care about in this. Um, just to move on
No,
to
I think that's a very
yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was saying that's a very brilliant observation and analogy, and I think that there are a plethora of examples you can point to that constitute the double standards, and I think this isn't one that I thought about, but
Yeah,
I think it's a really 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 sound a really really sound one.
yeah. Well, at this point of the discussion, both of us agree that these are very horrible events. I mean, majority of the world agree that what is happening in Palestine is really bad. We have to stop it. For some reason, we are still not able to stop it. You have recognitions, you have UN resolutions being proposed. What exactly are the barriers stopping this violence from unfolding? Even with the peace, what do you call it, the ceasefire agreement, which we'll come to in a bit, even with that, there is still infractions, there is still abuses of these agreements. The violence never ceases to stop. Why is it so difficult to end this?
So I think there has been, just like you said, an overwhelming um, global outrage against the genocide in Gaza, uh,
Yeah,
and the oppression of the Palestinian people, and Of course, despite that, the devastation has continued, and I think that this has exposed us to a very harsh reality. I think that the world is fundamentally hamstrung and fettered by a combination of geopolitics, financial interests, and influence. I
Yeah.
think um, this is about power. This is not just about diplomacy. I think like this is
Yeah.
about global power. Um, Organizations like IPAC, and I encourage anyone who doesn't know IPAC to AIPAC
Yeah.
to Google and just read about um, IPAC. I think an organization like IPAC organizations like IPAC, I think, wield enormous influence in Washington,
Yeah.
and they are able to shape and ensure Israel's strategic interests are protected.
Yeah.
I think even when you look beyond IPAC, you have rich donors who
Yeah.
are able to influence presidents. I watched Donald Trump's address in the Knesset, and he was giving a shout out of sorts
Yeah.
to a woman in the audience. I have forgotten her name, unfortunately, but yeah, if you just Google Donald Trump's Knesset address, I think it's there. Um, he gave a shout out to her. She is the wife of a billionaire, and
Yeah.
Donald Trump himself. I mean, they donated around $100 million to the Donald Trump campaign, and Donald Trump himself said that she has played a major role in persuading him to make policies that favor Israel. So
Wow.
and she said herself and her husband. He said categorically and verbatim that herself and her husband made more visits to the White House than anybody else. So his richest donor is pro-Israel. Donald Trump also said that he asked her to choose between America and Israel. He asked her, "Who do you prefer? What do you prefer, America or Israel?" And she refused to answer the question, meaning that even as somebody who is an American businesswoman, business mogul,
Yeah.
um, her loyalties and ties to Israel are so insane. So I
Yeah.
think this is not rocket science. When the president of the most powerful country, makes such a statement, even though playfully, and basically insinuates to being controlled by money,
Yeah.
like it explains everything. So IPAC controls, I think, 90% of American politicians. We saw that it has always startled me that on the
Yeah.
issue of Israel and Palestine, you have, you know, bipartisan consensus in American politics. Both
Yeah.
Democrats and Republicans alike agree.
Yeah.
And it's so dazzling to me that it's almost like a minimum, cross board. All of them
Yeah.
agree on this. And it's also coincidental that all of them are funded by IPAC. And the only
Yeah.
guys who are able to declare, criticize Israel's policies are those who are not funded by IPAC. So I think that IPAC wields enormous influence. There are, of course, conspiracy theories that I will not go into, but some of them are credible about assassinations and things like that. But I think those are not things that are
Yeah.
sensible to speak about on a podcast. But I think people look at those, and because they see how IPAC operates, because they see the power and the influence that they wield, I think there are legitimate question marks around their involvement in politics. The influence
Yeah.
of pro-Israeli lobbies transcends just politics. I think it extends to the
Yeah.
media and public discourse, which I would say is more devastating. We have seen social media platforms actively suppress voices documenting the crisis. I
Yeah.
was really appalled when I saw, I think 2 weeks ago, that Instagram wiped out the page of a journalist who was reporting about the Israeli genocide in Gaza from Gaza, and he
Yeah.
he he was he was killed by He was killed after the ceasefire was announced by
Yeah.
some militants in Gaza who allegedly were funded by the Israeli government, and Instagram wiped out his account where where he had very meticulously and painstakingly documented all the horrors that he had witnessed. And somebody said on Twitter, I can't remember who, but I saw a very interesting quote that when you kill and when you wipe out the account or the works of a journalist, you kill them twice. And I think that's what happened.
Wow.
That journalist was killed first in Gaza, but he was killed the second time by Instagram. We saw also with TikTok the squabble that existed there. The all the noise about China and
Yeah.
Asian influence, and but we saw again Netanyahu saying on camera that he's happy that um, um, TikTok has been purchased by someone who is pro-Israel. The new ownership group of TikTok is spearheaded by a guy who is the biggest, largest donor to the Israeli defense, or I mean, I don't call them Israeli defense forces. I think they are more Israeli offensive forces because there is nothing defensive about what they do. But it's
Yeah.
very, very ironical to me that all of a sudden the guy who now owns TikTok is pro-Israel and has even, advocated for a big state, for more
Yeah.
supervision on social media to keep the citizens in check. So these
Yeah.
things are, I'll say, very concerning to me. And I mean, of course, Facebook. We have seen things happen in Facebook that are very, very insane. There is more of a
Yeah.
consolidation at the top of these, rich tech companies, and the
Yeah.
policies are becoming increasingly similar.
Yeah.
And you know, um, even even like in the media space, there was something that was also very striking to me when the case went to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, when
Yeah.
South Africa was prosecuting the case, trying to make the case about genocide. Something happened. Um, South Africa presented first, of course, being prosecution, and on the day that they presented their case, no major news outlet covered their case. Not CNN, not BBC, not Sky News. And I thought, okay, what is going to happen here is that they are all going to pretend like this case is
It's
not
not happening.
happening, it's
Yeah.
non existent. But to my greatest shock, the next day, all these guys, CNN, BBC, Sky News, all of them showcased Israel's defense. And I was like, what the hell is
Wow.
going on here? Your job as news agencies is to educate the listener, to
Yeah.
enlighten us, to give us also the full picture of everything that is transpiring. And you decide to leave out the prosecution case and you present just the defense. And that
Yeah.
was really outrageous for me because this is the ICC, right?
Yeah.
This is a recognized court that has, I think, the only two non-members of the ICC are, I mean, quite funnily, the US and South Africa in the
Yeah.
West, as we know it. I don't know if Russia is part of the ICC, but I'm not quite sure. Like I said, I'm not an expert here, but I know for a fact that Israel and the US are not members of the ICC because of course they know what they do and they do not want to confine themselves to international law. But the ICC is as credible as it gets, and you're making a case for a genocide. You're not necessarily indicting. I mean, you're indicting Israel, but you're not making a conclusive verdict. So why would you not
Yeah.
show that to the people? Like,
Yeah.
why are you controlling like the narrative so much? So for me, that was really, really shocking. We have seen universities, and it's quite heartbreaking with universities because they are supposed to be the intellectual hub. Um, they're supposed to be training as we often refer to the leaders of tomorrow. You're supposed to be
Yeah.
shaping narratives. And people in universities are protesting against a genocide and are getting arrested. Like we have seen all kinds of repression. And
yeah,
so I think that this, and of course, like you still have arms continuing to flow. And
yeah,
Joe Biden didn't stop it. Donald Trump has taken it to the next level, and also quite problematically, the United States, who has veto power in the UN, continues
yeah.
to veto
Veto.
UN
Yeah,
resolutions that are aimed at holding Israel accountable. Like Israel is treated as a strategic ally, and governments are prioritizing the alliances, defense contracts, and regional leverage over the fundamental humanitarian imperative that I think should be the important issue to stop
yeah,
civilian deaths. So I think the truth is quite painful. We
yeah,
have seen we live in a world now where human suffering is subordinated to political calculations and financial interest, and the real machinery
yeah,
of influence, lobbying, media control, geopolitics have now effectively paralyzed the entire world from acting very decisively. And, you
yeah,
know, civilians in Gaza are paying the price. And I think that price is really devastating. It's really ugly to look at, but that is just the sad reality of the world that we live in today.
yeah. The next two questions I had, I'm going to try and merge them because they are very intertwined. Which is that the response we are seeing to the West, the global West, in response to Israel Palestine, is wildly different from what we saw to Russia Ukraine. Right? Russia invades Ukraine, and the next day, everybody, guys, the world is burning. Everybody chip in. Let's support Ukraine. And I'm not saying that do not support Ukraine. Obviously, Ukraine is needs all the support that they can get. They need to also defend their territories and protect their people and all. But the type of response they get is very, very significant. Funding, arms, sanctions on Russia. So both ways, trying to disempower the aggressor while empowering the person who is being abused in this sort of conflict. And you look at Palestine, and it's wildly different because the best, the absolute best Palestine has ever gotten from the West is Canada, Australia, and some of these other countries, the UK, coming out to say that we officially recognize Palestine as a state. That is not to say that that recognition is bad. It's good. It's a step forward, but it in no way compares to the lengths that the West has gone to. Take the UK, for instance. Recognizing Palestine in no way compares to the length they've gone to support Ukraine. So even the countries that take a moral admission that what is going on in Palestine is wrong, the practical steps to sort of match up that moral conviction that they've also recently found is woefully falling short. And you ask yourself, why? Why are they doing this? Even when they say that they recognize that what is happening is bad, they still are not able to support in any meaningful way.
So I mean, it's a very interesting observation. The response has been the response of the West to the Russia and Ukraine conflict has been really stark.
Yeah,
Um, you know, and of course, it exposes a really, really deep and worrying hypocrisy.
yeah,
When Russia invaded Ukraine, we saw, you know, we saw billions in sanctions. Even like in the football ecosystem, FIFA quickly banned
yeah,
Russia from international competitions. We saw, we saw cultural implications, even implications that were very devastating to the European economy because I
yeah,
think the EU relied on Russia for gas,
yeah,
and cutting ties with Russia at that point was very devastating, and
yeah,
led them to explore other markets, and it came at a very serious cost. So
yeah,
they were willing to even sabotage um, their own economic stability, just to make that very fast, coordinated, and visible response.
Yeah.
And you contrast that with Gaza, and Israel still continues to receive military and financial support, still continues to receive diplomatic cover in football. Infantino, the FIFA president, says, "Oh yeah, FIFA. It's not FIFA's responsibility to solve long-lasting geopolitical issues," which is quite funny because you kind of felt you could do that with Russia, and Russia remains banned, till today.
Yeah.
The Israeli football team still plays and competes in UEFA tournaments. We're still competing in the FIFA World Cup qualifiers,
Yeah.
and Israel hasn't faced any sanctions. We have had, shockingly, US members of Congress threatening members of the UN, threatening members of the judges in the ICC,
Yeah.
writing to ban them from entering the US. And we have seen really, 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 really surprising acts of hypocrisy. So I mean, I think that the difference is, like I alluded to, power, influence,
Yeah.
money, and also there is a great deal of blackmail. I will not speak directly to the blackmail, the instances of blackmail that I know of and I've read of and tried to verify.
Yeah.
They are conspiracies, and I call them conspiracies because they are still not 100% proven. But about Epstein, the whole Epstein files being connected to
Yeah.
Israeli politics, the extent of which I do not know, but I know that there is a great deal of credibility there because I have looked into that, and I encourage everyone else to look into those things. So I think, I mean, also, I cannot ignore geopolitics because Israel is a strategic ally in the Middle East of the US, and it kind of fits into the US and the Western defense calculations, having a regional power there and long term alliances. And Palestinians, in contrast, have very little leverage,
Yeah.
in this system. They do not have any military power. They do not have global clout, and they have no influential, lobbying networks that can
Yeah.
shape policy the same way. And that points us to that double, those the double standards that exist,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, I think these double standards have permanently eroded the credibility of the West. This conflict has really radicalized me because I have seen things that have really awakened me and really opened my eyes to the real, like, nature of global politics. And nobody's ever going to be the same. I
Yeah.
think there are many people who are even neutral, right? Who's seemingly neutral, but whose psychic has changed because the
Yeah.
West has always prided itself in being moral, in being advocates of democracy and freedom and blah 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 blah. But I think that in this particular conflict, and by evaluating the contrast of the responses to Israel and to Russia and Ukraine, they have really sent a very very and very overwhelmingly clear signal
Yeah.
that human life is weighed differently depending on their alliances, depending on their strategic interests too. When the global community applies one set of rules for Ukraine and a completely different one for Gaza, I think that undoubtedly undermines trust in international law.
Yeah.
It undermines trust in justice and moral authority. So I think it's just to summarize. I think it's a system where power and politics decides who lives and who dies,
Yeah.
not the need for universal human rights. And personally, I do not want to live in such a world, and that's why I haven't stopped speaking about what is going on in Palestine.
Yeah. 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 I wanted to ask in terms of the basis of all of this, the justification around it. Who is Hamas? Who are they? Because to some people, they say Hamas is representing all of Palestine. Other reports say, no, Hamas is just a radicalized group in Palestine. They had seemingly political origins, but they've since radicalized and evolved into something way beyond those political origins, or a group that simply is looking for some political power in Palestine. But for Israel, Hamas seems to be the justification for everything. Hamas is the reason. Hamas is the reason why human shields are there. Hamas is the reason why you should disregard human shields and just go for it. Hamas is the reason why this cannot be classified as a genocide, because they're a terrorist organization who are at the heart of everything that is happening in Palestine. And it is framed as blame Hamas for everything, but don't blame Israel for anything. So I think it helps to sort of help people understand who exactly Hamas is. Because the thing I also notice is that as much as people hear these conversations all the time, they usually have zero backdrop of what exactly these actors are. And it's mainly what whoever says they are is what they hear. So whatever Israel portrays Hamas to be is what people currently hear. And this is not to say that Hamas is a group that needs to be supported. For instance, if for nothing at all, for October 7th alone and what Hamas did, they obviously were not in any moral standing in those circumstances. So it's good to sort of understand where this is coming from and what role Hamas has to play in the whole political situation that's happening in Gaza today.
So, this is also a very delicate question, and I think it's a sober part of the conversation, perhaps the
Yeah,
most sober. I would say that Hamas is a name that immediately, triggers that label of terrorist,
terrorism. Yeah,
and in much of West, yeah, in much of Western discourse and even beyond. The reality is a lot more complex.
yeah,
And I mean, I have personally hated the use of the word complex for the entire conflict. But I think that the complexity of the complexity of the word complex has
yeah,
been abused and has been narrowed and co-opted by Israel in speaking about the broad conflict, in the sense that they do not want anybody out from the outside to comment on the conflict because they believe it is complex, but
yeah.
in their understanding or in their explanation of Hamas,
It's
they
very
do not
simple.
see any complexity. They just see them as terrorists, as devils, and as demons.
Yeah,
Hamas has carried out violent acts without a doubt. Hamas has carried out violent, deplorable acts. To understand them solely as terrorists, however, is to strip away decades of occupation, of systemic oppression, and political marginalization in Gaza. And I believe very strongly and very firmly that violence doesn't happen in a vacuum. There is a tragic pattern that exists here. The
yeah,
reality is that the easiest way to make a child a fighter, or in the language of the world, a terrorist, is to destroy their family and their community. And this is not something that is peculiar to Arabs. This is not something that is peculiar to Europeans. Anywhere in the world, the easiest way to make a child a fighter is to kill their family, is to wipe out their community.
yeah,
Many members of Hamas have relatives in Israeli prisons. Many of them have families that are under constant siege, have their homes destroyed, have their livelihoods blocked. The problem I have is that the world expects Palestinians to be passive and model victims. But I believe that human beings, respond to oppression in different ways. Like, I believe that revolt in the face of occupation has always been a norm and a constant in history. And
yeah,
I also believe that that the context does matter, and I believe that Palestinians have the right for the word context to be used in their own situation also, and not just in the Israeli viewpoint of the conflict. Nelson Mandela was branded a terrorist by the United States and other Western countries for decades, precisely because he resisted apartheid and colonial occupation.
Yeah.
It wasn't until 2008 that his legacy was fully recognized by the United States of America. So, in effect, Nelson Mandela was a terrorist until 2008. You wouldn't
Yeah.
know that if you didn't go back to read, because now he has been widely celebrated by the world.
Yeah.
Everybody sees Nelson Mandela as this great icon, but he was in officially in the US's book a terrorist.
Yeah.
You know, so I feel that if we look at Nelson Mandela, for example, like I feel Hamas arose under a very similar dynamic, resistance to occupation and denial of the resistance to occupation and a denial of their political self-determination.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier, there is also a political dimension that has been largely overlooked, and that is that Netanyahu himself has publicly admitted that in the 1980s, Israel helped to foster Hamas as a way to limit to weaken the political liberation organization.
Yeah.
They saw it as a strategy to divide Palestinians and marginalize um, the leadership by by making them conflict with themselves, because if they pursued a united national or unified national movement, it would have been more poignant, more powerful, more influential, and perhaps would have ensured or limited Israeli influence in that in the occupied land of Palestine.
Yeah.
So I think that that the historical realities complicate that simplistic narrative that Hamas is a purely terrorist organization. There is an element of political engineering by Israel itself, orchestrating the very horrors in a way
Yeah.
that they now strongly disavow.
Yeah.
Beyond armed resistance too, I think that Hamas also provides governance, social services, education, and basic infrastructure in Gaza. I think that reducing them to a label of terrorist erases the very lived experiences of those people that they govern. And I think by just labeling them as terrorists alone, you also obscure the system, um, the system that they function within, and the very structural causes of their resistance. To
Yeah.
truly understand Hamas, I think you have to see both sides. Um, you must fundamentally see the human suffering that fuels resistance, and you must also see you must also see the political forces that shape the global perceptions of
Yeah.
Hamas. So I think that calling Hamas terrorists without context is misleading. They are resistance movement that has been born out of occupation, born out of oppression, and political marginalization. So recognizing that this is crucial. Recognizing that does not condone violence, but I think that it forces the world to confront the conditions that produce, the violence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that for me is what I've been saying from the very beginning, because I have put myself in the shoes of those people who live there, those kids who are now orphans, who have been who have seen their family members killed, amputated, bombed. Like I put myself in their shoes, and I often ask myself, would I act any differently? And the answer is no.
Yeah. I think this is quite an interesting perspective on it, especially in applying the context bit to it. And for me, the serious bit of it is the dismissal of the context is in some way informing why this approach is being used to try and solve it. Because if you think about it, the approach being used now amplifies the very context that created Hamas. It expands that context. It worsens the context. And the logic there is that is happening because the context is constantly disregarded as a function or as having anything to do with why Hamas exists or why Hamas was formed to begin with. And if you think about it, it's the way in which we it's a function of the label itself as terrorism, because terrorism is viewed as an inherent desire for destruction regardless of context, regardless of incentives. It is just an innate desire to destroy. And it is not fueled by anything, it's not motivated by anything. It's just purely evil people who are looking to destroy the world and make it evil. And if you think about it that way, then the context doesn't matter, right? Therefore, even if your solution, your purported solution is recreating that context, you don't care. But if you try and appreciate the context, like you said, it obviously, very, very obviously tells you this is not the way to go. Because what you do is you might end this Hamas, but you might create another one because the very conditions that drive people to want to resist do not go away. You are multiplying them. You are increasing the scope, the scale, the intensity, and the amount of grief that people have. And that grief doesn't just disappear, it doesn't go
And
away.
and you make a very excellent point. And that is now why, you know, I see many Israelis say that the children there have to be killed because they know that if you kill their parents, the children are going to be terrorists. And
Yeah.
their solution is instead of us stopping killing their parents, let us also kill the children. Let's wipe out everybody there so they don't have any legitimate trials against them. Every single Palestinian male right now that is alive has lost a family member to Israel. Every
Yeah.
single Palestinian male alive right now has a legitimate grouse against Israel, has anger, has bitterness, has hatred because they have seen the devastation. 80% of Gaza has been flattened. There is
Yeah.
no human being in the world who will not be angry. Even Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, our Lord and Savior, as
As
Christians,
Christians,
I've
yeah.
seen him have moments of rage and anger. But I mean, he had like he's God. So he has, for me, like an overwhelming amount of love and peace and in his heart.
Yeah.
But there were moments where there was catharsis, there was anger, there was rage. I feel that anybody confined to those kinds of conditions will have a grouse. So you cannot create those circumstances, oppress people, kill people, and then, when you know that the children are going to grow up with spite against you, either say, yeah, oh, these people hate us. So in as far back as 20 years ago, Palestinians disliked Israelis.
Yeah.
After after what has happened in the last 2 years, and with 680,000 Palestinians dying, do they like them anymore now, or do they hate them any less now? I think no. So for me, this aspect of the conversation is very, very crucial. But
Yeah.
instead of us having this very frank and very honest conversation, it seems like, for you to engage in this conversation, you must fundamentally see Hamas as absolute scum, as absolute evil, and as terrorists. And I refuse that to be confined to that. I refuse. I mean, you probably have seen very many interviews where the first thing that they ask the interviewee is,
Yeah.
"Do you condemn Hamas?"
Yeah.
Like, I condemn killings. I
Yeah.
condemn, like, loss of lives. I condemn, those the horrors that emanate from that. I do not want anybody to die, but even the letter of the law in democracies does not condemn every single murderer. If somebody comes into your house and tries to kill you or kills your child and is about to shoot you, the law allows you to shoot them back. So even within our legal systems, not all murderers in the spirit of the action um, are condemned. Like,
Yeah.
if somebody broke into your house, shot your dog, and shot your daughter in the room, and was passing by the window, and you found a way to shoot him, and you go for an interview, Nobody's going to ask you. Oh, nobody's going to say, oh, or your family was interviewed. Oh, do you condemn your husband? Like, no. Like we kind of we rationalize that sometimes like murder or violence
Yeah.
is carried out in
Self-defense.
response to something.
Yeah.
That's yeah, like we hate that somebody died, like we loathe it, but these are the circumstances that led us to that. So I think
Yeah.
there's complexity within. I can see how the Israelis will take from there and say, well, we have killed 680,000 people because 1,000 people died. But even by that logic, I'm pretty sure, knowing all we know now, if after October 7th you asked the Palestinians, look, would you want 1,000 Palestinians to be killed? Because that's the number that they say died in October 7th. I don't know what the
Yeah.
official number is, truthfully, because I've heard about the fact that the Israeli military also shot there and killed several Israelis. So it wasn't only Hamas that killed there. I think the scale of and this is something that has been reported within Israel. So it's not like
Yeah.
a conspiracy theory that is emanating outside against Jews. It's properly reported in the Israeli media that like one of the soldiers that was interviewed said that she decided to kill some of these citizens because she did not want Hamas to have Israeli hostages. So she, instead of giving them any bargaining chip, she thought it was more sensible to kill all of them. But I'm pretty sure if you ask Palestinians now, would you have preferred for 1,000 random Palestinians to be killed instead of 2 years of genocide? I'm sure they would have said yes. So even if you wanted to go for an eye for an eye, it would have still been a better like scenario for the Palestinians. Like
Yeah.
680,000 people have died. 80%, if not 90% of their land has been completely flattened. Like no universities existing anymore, no hospitals, like out of the 30 something that they had. So like
Yeah.
it's really, really, really insane, to be honest with you.
The thing that this is drawing me to is the fact that violence is violence, right? There's violence for bad causes, there's violence for good causes. But in the political world that we exist in, there are two things that are not objective. One is the labeling of the causes. Who determines whether the cause is good or bad? It's up to a lot of the time the interest of whoever you are speaking to. And for the Western media and for Israeli actors, obviously, I'm sure like there are people who see the context for what it is, but they would see the violence and they would never agree to the objective. And secondly, the labeling of what that violence is. Like you're saying, in for a very long time, Nelson Mandela's use of violence was labeled negative. He was called a terrorist, and he was said to be one that humanity didn't need. I'm sure within that period, if they found a way to eliminate him, they would. Years down the line, the
Yeah.
view on that
Yeah.
use of violence changes, and all of a sudden, he's no more a terrorist. He wasn't using unholy violence. He was now using positive violence for the furtherance of accessing political rights and freedoms of people who deserved them, and he's celebrated as an icon of freedom in the world of fight. I'm sure people put the likes of Nelson Mandela sometimes as high on the pedigree, equal to the likes of Martin Luther King, as to the influence they've had around
Absolutely.
liberation.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
to see that he comes from that background of
Absolutely.
politically labeling him as a terrorist is wildly insane. And it tells you that it's a lot more about the powers that be and what they want, as opposed to the objectivity on the ground and what the actual objectives of people are, up until the world decides, you know what, we've gotten what we want, and now we can switch the labels just to celebrate you, so far as you didn't give up. Man, this is insane.
It's horrible. It's horrible, and it's eye opening. Also,
Yeah,
because you grow up as an African, maybe as a Nigerian. I won't speak for the whole of Africa, but as a Nigerian, my dad is a professor of law.
yeah,
The CNN is always on the news. and it's always on the TV from time to
Yeah.
time. You're encouraged to watch shows. You grow up and you become a debater. I started debating at 16, 17, and I'm reading The Economist all the time, and
Yeah.
I'm trusting these guys.
Yeah.
Like, because maybe my knowledge of history wasn't always so expansive, so there is a very great level of trust I have for what I'm reading and what I'm seeing, and all of a sudden I'm beginning to see that it was all built on a lie, and it's all about narratives.
Yeah.
Yesterday, the Associated Press of the United States, which is the most reputable journalistic agency, released a statement saying Israel strikes Gaza um, in test of ceasefire, not in breach of ceasefire, in
What?
test of ceasefire. It was deliberate language. And I've seen this so many times with Palestinians, where a child will be killed, and the headline
Headline.
will
Yeah.
be a young girl or a young adult has been killed, and you click on it, and you see that the young adult or young man is a 7-year-old boy that has been bombed. So when I see this, I'm like, I read The Economist. I took these guys very seriously. Like, I repeated the arguments I saw there as law, as word, as reason,
Yeah.
and this is what has always been. So it's very eye opening for me and very humbling at the same time, because like I don't see all these news agencies the same way. I don't look at the Americans the same way. When I see
Yeah.
anytime I think of America, what I have in my mind, or the image I have in my mind, is the image of their representative in the United Security Council being the only hands raised up when they try to pass resolutions
Yeah.
to buffer or relieve the Palestinians from very
Yeah.
immense suffering that they have had to endure. So these things are, I mean, they are. We speak about them freely, and we speak about them confidently, but I think they really hurt the soul.
Yeah.
They hurt that very positive, outward looking teenager, that trusted the West, that saw the world in a very positive light. They do something to me, particularly.
To be very honest, I like growing up, quickly realizing how the media work sort of made me very, very cautious of how I consume media. And a lot of the time, I'm trying to be an independent thinker instead of just reading stuff and following what is being said in the media. And I'm sort of like, it's difficult to find people like that, because it's also difficult to see thousands of people believe in something and you be the only person who says, my brain, my mind, my logical reasoning concludes on a different note from what all these people believe. Therefore, I'm sticking with what I believe in. Because the fundamental weaknesses of us as humans is our tendencies to be wrong and the inferiority complex that comes with it. The fact that then if majority of people are right, then maybe I'm the problem. Or if majority of people are standing that way, then maybe I'm the problem, and not that they might have collectively been wrong. And I think what you are saying is really true to for people who are for especially for young people who are growing up now. The media is probably one of the most difficult spaces to be in, because it's almost impossible to discern anything to be truthful. And that's a tough thing to experience, especially in an age of information overload, where you sort of rely on people, or you sort of would want to rely on external sources that you can trust,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
there's none. There's
Mhm.
there's absolutely none that you can trust.
Indeed,
Um,
indeed.
I was I mean, if we want to go on with this conversation, we'll probably have a 3 hour conversation on on
Yeah,
on this.
yeah, indeed, bro.
Um, I wanted to take us a bit nearer to the end and try and figure out, as ordinary people, because sometimes the difficulty is you and I are here talking about it. I have listened to several conversations around Israel Palestine relations. I've watched UN sittings. I've watched clips of what do you call it, the ICC and the hearings that are going on there. I've had discussions with friends, and a lot of the time the conclusion becomes, ah, well, there's nothing we can do, and all we can do is hope that things get resolved. And same thing probably would be the conclusion of every single listener who'll be listening to this conversation, would near towards the end and figure out, well, this is probably another lengthy conversation about Israel Palestine. And as devastating as we've described it to be, what can I do? And so I'm trying to figure out now, what do you think that ordinary people in their ordinary capacities, and I don't use ordinary in terms of a demeaning word, but as in a practical recognition that we do not wield any significant political influence. We do not wield the powers of the world to be able to snap a hand and say, this blockade should go away or this resolution should happen. As people who are limited in those circumstances, what exactly can we lend to this struggle? And what can we do to further the fight for peace, for the end to violence, and for the end to this systemic occupation that's ongoing in Gaza?
I would say in a world that doesn't want you to care about Palestinians, caring about Palestinians is the greatest form of resistance. It's that simple.
Wow.
We have seen the lengths. We have seen the lengths that
Yeah.
the American government, that IPAC, that the Israeli government has gone
Yeah.
to ensure that we don't care about Palestinians. We have seen
Yeah.
the millions. I hear influencers on social media who earn who support Israel earn around $7,000 per post. We have seen these
Wow.
people purchase TikTok. Yeah, we have seen people purchase TikTok. We have seen them purchase TikTok because
Yeah.
they were scared that public sympathy was overwhelming. We have seen in the UK they have suppressed. They have even tried to limit people from attending rallies in support of Palestine. We have seen in the US that people's visas have been revoked.
Yeah.
Students who have supported the Palestinian cause. So I think just waking up every day and for 2 seconds still thinking about Palestine is resistance in and of itself. And I think that that aside, that I believe that we citizens have more power than we think. If we didn't have
Yeah.
as much power as we think, they would not be spending ridiculous amounts of money um, to control the algorithm.
Yeah.
They will not be trying to suppress as much as they are suppressing. If they could just do whatever they want, they would do it without, spending up to $7,000 on social media posts pro Palestine
Yeah.
and pro Palestine. I will not be spending as much money as it does in the United States to influence elections
Yeah.
if our voices didn't matter. So I think caring about Palestine and Palestine is resistance. I think advocacy. I understand like when people cannot post about Palestine or make comments because I know that many people have lost their jobs, have lost their livelihoods because
Yeah.
of this particular struggle because of their thoughts and their opinions that have been shared in public spaces. So
Yeah.
I understand and I don't judge people because we have responsibilities. We live in a very messed up world, in a very
Yeah.
capitalistic society where a few control everything. So I get that, but I think just caring, advocacy, awareness, humanitarian aid. I think people who can donate to um, can donate, should donate. I think
Yeah.
amplifying voices of Palestinians also matters.
Yeah.
Anytime I'm on social media and I see a post made by somebody in Palestine, I try to retweet, to like, because their voices, their perspective, matters a lot. Those who can lobby governments should lobby governments, supporting NGOs that are delivering medical care, food, um, participating in campaigns for accountability,
Yeah.
moral pressure, and yeah, there's a lot that we can do strategically. But what I think that we cannot afford to do is silence, because I
Yeah,
think silence is complicity, no matter
yeah,
how it is spun. And silence doesn't just mean vocal silence. Our actions can be silent. If you are in a position to donate to Palestinian causes and you're not donating, that's silence. That's
yeah,
inaction. So I think that we can all do the little that we can do. We can all enlighten ourselves. Even the mere act of enlightenment is crucial, because what we
yeah,
will see happening over the course of the years is that this genocide is going to be erased.
yeah,
Instagram did it by wiping out the journalist account that I told you about. So
yeah,
if you're not educated enough and you're not confident enough on in these conversations,
yeah,
in 10 years you will put on ChatGPT, tell me about this genocide, and ChatGPT will tell you what genocide,
yeah,
and all the evidence is going to be skewed. So I
yeah,
also think that studying and self enlightenment is a very, 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 very valid form of resistance, because
yeah,
you are an oracle in a sense. I'm going
yeah,
to transfer everything I've learned about this conflict and this moment in history to my children verbatim.
yeah,
I'm not going to wait for them to read on the news or whatever. What has
yeah,
happened is striking, and has really, like I'll say, radicalized me to a great extent. And I'm
yeah,
going to make it a duty to make sure that, like, my children, when God blesses me with children, also have the knowledge that I have and understand the world through the lenses that I have seen. So I think that every little thing that can be done, because not just because of Palestinians, because you might not help them, but one of the reasons I care is that these are people who are being massacred in the eyes of the public,
yeah,
in 3D, right? So that means it can be anybody. I'm a black man, I'm a minority. If they can
yeah,
do it to Palestinians, they can do it to me. You know,
yeah,
I saw a billboard. Uh, I saw someone raising a placard in a rally in the
yeah,
US 2 or 3 days ago. The placard said something like, they first came for the blacks and I did nothing. And then he just says, well, like, instead of saying and I did nothing, he said in bracket, I did something because I know the rest of the fucking poem. And indeed, like, they will come for one group first,
yeah,
and then they will test the waters and see, and then they will go for another group and another group. And I feel it's the same thing with, like, these. I believe in very intersectional politics. You know,
yeah,
if you're white, you're privileged, and, for example, you see what ICE is doing in the United States, and you're silent because it doesn't affect you. Tomorrow, they are going to find a way to target your own in group, even within,
yeah,
like, whiteness generically. And as a
yeah,
black man, if you're saying, well, this is a Muslim struggle, your rights are also going to one day be infringed, because
yeah,
there is more and more and more consolidation at the top, by these powerful, wealthy, billionaires. And I think the
yeah,
only real alliance is right now the class alliance. Mark
yeah,
Zuckerberg, 5 years ago or thereabouts, 4 years ago, banned Donald Trump from Facebook. Now
yeah,
he's in all his gala dinners.
yeah,
So billionaires know how to each other. They know how to
yeah,
rally around their interest. I think, like, and we as the working class, we as the rest, as the 90% or the 99%, we have a responsibility to coalesce, to
yeah,
to come together and ensure that we hold the 1% accountable.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like you've said, the thing that scares me the most about the era that we are in, unlike all the past eras, is that it takes almost not little effort in terms of financial sense, but little technical effort to erase history. It could take one click of a button to wipe out decades of information that have been accumulated to document the truthfulness of what is ongoing. It could take a tweak in an algorithm to silence specific versions of the story and amplify specific versions so that history does not bear it out. And so for me, that's probably my biggest fear around all of these. The fact that the and it was something I was coming to recently, a realization I was coming to recently, that a lot of the time people jump to the conclusion that technological evolution is probably one we probably live in the best timeline in history because of all the things that technology does for us. But as much as the luxury it brings us, I think we also live in the riskiest timeline in history. The fact that everything about you is digital, the fact that history could be erased, history could be modified, the fact that people's struggles could be made meaningless by the retelling of a story in ways that they have absolutely no control over. And for me, I think that's the biggest risk with all of this. And so lending my voice to this is my attempt to negate that aspect of the struggle, to negate the attempt to wipe out what exactly is happening and popularize in the media circles the politically biased ways of reflecting what exactly is happening in Palestine and silencing the people who actually deserve to be voiced out. And I think it's very difficult. It's a difficult world to live in right now in terms of the technology aspect of it, because we live in it. We have no option than to engage with it, but we have almost absolutely no control about how that technology is used, how it is programmed, and how it aligns politically with the objectives of people. And you mentioning Zuckerberg was classic, because it was a thing I was saying that once Trump was elected, every major tech billionaire in the US was now right wing. And it shocks you how much one election could change policies on social media, could change the kind of content that's amplified. What do you call it? Content moderation was a big thing 2 3 years ago, and now it's not, because the political weathers have shifted, and it's no more in the interest of the powers that be to silence or to limit specific posts that were deemed to be unhealthy for public consumption and were not in the interest of the public. So yeah, it's been a very, very lengthy but very, very enlightening conversation with you. And before we go, I just wanted to lend you the final words to 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 wrap up this conversation for us in terms of what do you want to leave us with as words from you that we can pathways with.
All right. It's been a really it's been a very interesting conversation, and also an enlightening conversation for me, hearing your perspectives too. And I think for me, I like historical parallels, and
Yeah,
we have mentioned and dwelt on the South African parallel, the Nelson Mandela parallel, particularly because I think that's what in modern history is really has been one of the most striking and telling things that has really underlined Western hypocrisy.
yeah,
I want to leave or end on the note of something more non-mainstream in a sense, something that I also in the course of my own research and study into how colonialism works, how occupation works, realized. What I have seen and recognized is that history um, always has rhythm,
yeah,
um, and there is never really a new movie. History,
yeah,
for example, with what is going on in Israel and Palestine, like history has seen this movie before. Um,
yeah,
if you look back to Algeria under French rule, um, France didn't just colonize Algeria, France replaced it. They arrived in 1830.
yeah,
They were claiming civilization, progress, and order, and they stayed for 132 years in Algeria. They confiscated land, they banned Arabic, they called the native population subjects and not citizens. They didn't come to share in the largesse of the Algerians, they came to possess. And when Algerians finally rose up, the French military answered with the same rhetoric that we hear today: security operations, self defense, counter-terrorism, maintaining the order. Behind those words, I think was embedded a very simple reality. A
yeah,
colonial power, once again, was terrified of losing its control. And I think in both cases, Algeria back then and Palestine now, you see the same patterns. Foreign settlers are planted and protected by one of the strongest militaries in the world, because the French military was incredibly strong at the time. And the planting of foreign settlers is justified by a story that claims either divine right in the case of Israel or a civilizational right in the case of France. And you have a native population being branded as violent for refusing to disappear very quietly, for refusing to be very passive and very model victims. You have a land that is divided by walls, divided by checkpoints, and divided by fear. And you have an occupying power that is insisting that the resistance is a problem and not the occupation itself. The French said Algeria was effectively France. They said that there was no such thing as an Algerian nation. And we see the same rhetoric from the Israeli government today, because the Israelis often insist that there is no Palestinian nation either. You have the same logic, you have the same denial, you have the same violence that is dressed up as a necessity. But again, history always has a rhythm. And the reality is that all colonial projects, no matter how mighty they are, always eventually collapse under their own moral weight. France learned that the hard way in 1962. And when they left, the world discovered that the terrorists had been freedom fighters all around. I think the truth, and the haunting truth, if I may, is that the war for Algeria ended, but the echoes of that war never really ended, because I know and I'm convinced that um, every empire always thinks that it's the last one. And every colonizer always believes that this time it's different. But the reality is that the same script always plays out. Um, if the world really learned from Algeria, I feel that it wouldn't have let Palestine burn for 75 years. I think we have reached the crescendo of this, and I am very confident that sooner or later, the same way that Algeria freed itself from those shackles, those horrendous, self-righteous shackles of French civilian oppression, I think that one day in the near future, Palestine is going to be free. And I'm very compelled by that. And we all have a role to play, like I've said. And the greatest role that we have to play is just enlightening ourselves and just caring. And I am going to continue caring about Palestine, no matter what happens, no matter how what the world devolves into. And I encourage you, the listener, to also do the same. Thanks.
You know, the most the the things that you said, the words that you said, that I don't know, I felt goosebumps on my skin, was us expecting them to disappear quietly. It's like someone stabbing you and saying, "Don't you dare scream! Don't you dare shout for help! Don't you dare react to the very visible pain that I'm inflicting on you." And it's the worst form of punishment ever. I mean, in a light-hearted manner, we do it. We see it in African circles where a parent is beating a child and then says, "Keep quiet, don't shout, keep quiet, shh," even though they are beating you. And it's probably the most horrific experience. And me visualizing it from the description you gave was like, I think there's no more inhumane expectation we could ever have of a human civilization, of a human population, to say be silent and disappear quietly. I don't think there's any worse expectation we could ever have of any group of people. And so for me, your words ending this are really, really powerful. And I obviously would want to say thank you so much for joining me on this episode. I know that this episode is one of the few episodes that took
Always.
a lot of work to to craft because we obviously wanted to have the best of conversations
Yeah.
here. And so, as we close, for the listeners, I always want you to remember the heart of this discussion, that the war in Gaza has killed thousands of Palestinians and displaced countless more people. It has exposed the fragility of our international systems, the double standards, the hypocrisy of powerful nations, and the deep entanglement of faith, politics, and an expectation that context should always be ignored so far as it suits a political interest. But acknowledging genocide, demanding accountability, and affirming Palestinian dignity are not acts of hate to Jews. They're expressions of our shared humanity that we should be bold enough to claim. So I invite you all as listeners to seek out reliable information in this age where information is difficult to find in its truthful and raw state, to stand against all forms of dehumanization, no matter who it targets and no matter how far away they stand from you. Because, like Faithfulness said, it starts with one person and it might be at your door next. And engage compassionately with those who are most affected, because the world may feel broken, but faith, justice, and moral courage would always guide us towards repair. And every empire, in Faithfulness's famous words to me now, always comes to an end. Thank you so much for listening and see you on another episode of the Shafts Conversations.